I'm Alan.
And I'm Jake.
And welcome to our brand new show, Crimicide True Stories. The show where we just kind of find some scary stories on Reddit, tell them to you guys.
Yep. It's basically the premise.
Also because, as you guys may not know, I am the editor for Crimicide. And editing just takes a long time. And we try to upload videos weekly. So this is going to be put in between every episode of mainstream Crimicide because it's just easier for me to edit that way.
So we'll have main episodes of Crimicide every other week.
Every other week.
With episodes of True Stories in between.
Yeah. Basically, it's easy to edit these, and Crimicide mainstream is just really time-consuming to edit. I spend like hours and hours editing those. But without further ado, let's tell some stories.
This story was posted to our True Scary Stories by Kid Charles Rock. My friends and I have a podcast where we tell scary stories. This is one that is infamous in my family and that I grew up hearing and telling. Back in the 80s, my Aunt Kay was in her early 20s. This was before she married my uncle, and when she would drive long distances back and forth between her parents and my uncles to visit. This was a transitional period for them. He had just graduated and she hadn't moved out yet to be with him. It was a long drive across several states through the desert, which took her hours. This desolate highway would have stretches of road that lasted hundreds of miles, where you quite often wouldn't see another driver, let alone a gas station. So Aunt Kay set out and began one of these journeys. A couple hours into the drive, Aunt Kay noticed a dark vehicle slowly catching up to her. She barely noticed as she continued to sing along to Les Miserables until the vehicle got aggressively close. She turned off the music and looked into her rear-view mirror, seeing the vehicle flash its brights and a hand pointing at her car and motioning to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed and began to look for a good place to pull off the road to see what must be wrong with her car. The second she began to pull off the road, she said she felt and heard as clear as day, "Don't pull over." Then again, stronger, "Don't pull over." Call it God, intuition, or just a gut feeling, but a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through Aunt Kay's body as she hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway. Heart pumping, Aunt Kay silently asked herself what the hell was that, as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, flash their brights, and motioned to her to pull over. Fear and confusion set in as Aunt Kay began to question what was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over? Was there something wrong with her car? And what the hell was the warning she felt? It would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, especially before cell phones, but she pressed on. Just as her resolve wavered, she started questioning if she did truly feel what she felt. She started slowing back down when the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered into the oncoming traffic lane and came level to my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned, and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. She said the second she looked into his eyes, she felt pure evil. She felt a horribly sick feeling in the pit of her stomach and again heard the words in her head, "Don't pull over." She described him as looking scary, greasy, and noticed he was missing a couple teeth in a smile that she'll never forget. That sent chills through her. This quickly dispelled any thoughts she had of pulling over, and she put the pedal to the metal to try and lose him. He chased after her. She slowed down, he slowed down. She sped up, he sped up. It got to the point that he began to try to push her car off the road. Aunt Kay was to the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize her alone out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Aunt Kay sees a couple of semis off in the distance. She felt if only she could get close or even get in between those trucks, she would be safe, so she took off. He continued to flash his lights, honk his horn, and try to hit her car until she got close enough to the trucks. As she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicle slow way down and eventually disappear from view. She stayed with the trucks for a couple hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and cry. Fast forward several years. My aunt and uncle are married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mom of several young children. Since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline, 2020, and Unsolved Mysteries were always playing at their house. This day was no different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row. As she paired another match of socks, she heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. A car would go by with a family, and he'd wait. Another car with a male driver would go by, and he'd wait. But every so often, a car would go by with a pretty woman driving alone. So I'd pull out behind and follow him. I'd flash my brights, honk, and motion for him to pull over. Aunt Kay, paralyzed, continued to listen. When they would eventually pull over, I'd tell them to pop the hood, and I'd be able to tell them what was wrong with their car. They would, and I'd yank a couple wires. When the car wouldn't start, I'd tell them no problems. My buddy has a shop in next town. I can give you a ride, and he'll give you a fair deal. My aunt slowly moved to the living room. They'd get in, and I'd assault and kill them, bury them anywhere in the desert. When asked how many times he did this, he responded, "They'll never find all the bodies. I can't even count." And how many got away? 2 or 3. My aunt stood alone, staring into that same toothless grin she saw on that highway that day. It was Henry Lee Lucas.
Pretty fucked.
He's one of the most, notorious serial killers there's ever been.
Did you just Google it?
No. No, I've not been on Google.
Oh.
I swear to God, no. No, it's not on Google looking that.
So you know who Henry Lee Lucas is?
No, yeah, yes, I have heard of him. Years ago, I worked at a restaurant in the Florida Keys, and one of my coworkers there, she actually told me the story. She spent a night with Henry Lee Lucas when she lived in Michigan.
What?
She did not know it was him. She did not know it was him at the time, and they're just, he gives her a ride, and they go to a diner, and he drops her off where she's needing to go, and the next couple weeks, I think it was, she saw on the news Henry Lee Lucas, his face, and so yeah, scared her shitless. That's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, sorry, I was screenshotting stories so I could, do voiceover and credit you off.
Okay. Is it my turn?
Yes, it is. Take it away.
This story was submitted to our True Scary Stories by Reddit user Let's Fighting Love. I am shy about speaking of this because it sounds unbelievable, and I don't want it to affect my credibility in real life with other people. I do not claim to know what happened in these scenarios. I don't ascribe it to ghosts or anything specific. All I know is that things happened in my house that I cannot explain. We moved into a house built in 1980 in 1992. I had a bedroom on the top floor that always made me feel strange. I was 4 at the time. I never played in there or slept in there. I slept in the floor in my brother's room for about a year. As I got older, I got over it and started sleeping in my bedroom. Things happened in the house pretty infrequently at that time. I only really just felt as though I was being watched and ran through the house quickly at night to get into my bed. I always felt extremely exposed, and I don't know why. At one point, my dad and I were in our living room playing cards. I was maybe 8 at the time. We heard what sounded like someone walking back and forth in my brother's bedroom right above us, but no one else was home. We went upstairs to my brother's room and saw nothing. We then heard the same walking in our living room where we were playing cards, so we went back downstairs to check and no one was there. At that point, we heard it in our wooden basement stairs. Up and down, over and over, we checked that too, and it stopped. My dad and I both experienced this together and neither of us could explain it. Around that time, I woke up in the middle of the night and felt this horribly depressing feeling. It was the same way the Dementors in Harry Potter make you feel, just that all joy had been sucked away. I felt it in my soul somehow, like it was part of me. Then my body just started shaking like I was having a seizure. I know this sounds made up, I know it does, but my body was shaking like crazy, so I started praying and it stopped. I was afraid to fall asleep again after that in case it could happen again. It never did. I did not have epilepsy. I was awake the entire time. I cannot explain what happened. Perhaps there's a medical explanation. I've never really looked into it. When I got older, things started to get worse. As a teenager, I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sounds of someone walking up and down the stairs right outside my door. I would hear glass breaking in the living room. I would hear shuffling. I could never find evidence that things were altered in any way. No broken glass, no furniture out of place. It was bizarre. I never stopped feeling like I was being watched, but I never saw anything. I just always heard things. My dad, however, claims he saw his grandmother in her old rocking chair in our basement, and she was telling my dad he needs to straighten up. He died 2 years later. Lying in my bed at night, I would be watching TV or reading, would blink without thinking about it, and in my mind I would see an image of my bedroom with different creatures in the corner staring at me. I would blink again and the creatures would be, in my mind, standing above me or right next to me. Now, I can definitely consider this as some weird psychological thing manifesting, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyway, because I would just see these absurd humanoid-type things in my bedroom when I blinked, and the next blink would always have them right by me, staring. There was a very tall, bowed woman in the corner once, covered in rags and skinny as a rail. She was very hunched over, and suddenly she was towering above me. It was like a scary movie, and it really freaked me out at the time. Another was a short, little stumpy creature with a snarling face, also covered in rags or something, so I couldn't make out its body, almost like Cousin It. Just covered in something, but not hair, and only maybe 3 feet tall. Anyway, the scariest thing that ever happened was around 1 p.m. in the afternoon one day. I was home alone, and all the doors were locked. I was taking a bath upstairs. The stairs were right outside the bathroom, directly in front of it. I was just bathing and relaxing when I heard my dog making grunting sounds. She liked to sit on our stone mantel for a fireplace, and it sounded like her little nails were scraping across the stone. She was grunting like she was being shoved, which was strange, but I didn't really think anything of it. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like an extremely heavy something storming up the stairs. We had 14 stairs, and I only heard about 5 stomps. I grew extremely still so the water in the tub wouldn't make a sound. I then heard heavy, angry breathing right outside the bathroom door. It sounded absolutely furious, and it did not sound like an animal or a human. It just sounded like primal rage. I can't really describe it. I'm not religious, but I started praying, because it was all I could think to do in that moment. Suddenly, it just stopped. My adrenaline must have been insane, because after a moment of being absolutely stunned, I put my towel around me and looked everywhere in my house in case there was an intruder. I checked the doors, and they were all still locked. There was no one in my closet, under any bed, nothing. It was just gone. At that point, I grabbed my cordless phone, no cell phones at the time, and ran to the bottom of my driveway where I called my best friend to come get me. I slept with the lights on for an entire year after that. When we moved out of that house, everything stopped. I never had another paranormal experience, and that was 13 years ago. Don't have an explanation, but I don't know if I even want to know, to be honest.
Now, I gotta say, I may not believe in ghosts, but I do look forward to the day where we actually do an episode of us ghost hunting.
Absolutely. I'm a lot more open to the possibility of existence of ghosts than he is.
I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm a very open-minded person.
I'm 50-50 on it.
Really? I thought you were like die hard.
I'm somewhat 50-50 on it because
make sure you save that post.
Oh shit.
You better find it.
There we go. I'm very 50-50 on it because
oh, you're not even on the app. Just screenshot it.
Yeah. No, I'm very 50-50 on it. I would love to see some definitive proof, evidence, video, sound, anything. I would love to witness something with my eyes and be 100% onto it.
Yeah, honestly, I may not believe in ghosts right now, but the day we do find evidence, I'll believe. Anyway, let's get into the next story.
This next story was posted to Our True Scary Stories by Glass Eye 7. I was 11 or 12 the last time I went to summer camp. Camp Catan, it was called. A typical organized camp setup in the 50 or so acres adjacent to a religious school with wooden cabins set up for each year, swimming pools, lakes, the works. Once or twice a year, they would rent another ground, far south of Atlanta, for the older kids as a special sleepover occasion. I had already done it once before the previous year and had great fun with my friends, staying up late into the night on the ice-cold concrete slab next to a creek, the whole setup overlooking 20 or 30 miles of old farmland, mostly overgrown with small trees. The camp counselors, usually 18 to 20-year-olds with varying degrees of care for their children, would usually be less strict regarding breakfast or roll call, usually not doing it until 12 to 1 p.m. the following day and packing up to go back to the regular camp around 4 p.m. This time, my 3 friends and I promised to sneak out early in the morning as soon as dawn before the camp counselors were up and explore the farmlands that they barely let us play in. Planning ahead, we had packed thick jackets and extra food. We awoke as promised and quickly grabbed our things and left. We reached the border of the campground in no time and passed the small creek which bisected the campground property from the more wild farmlands and entered in an old area which had clearly seen better days. A line of rusty barbed wire eating into the landscape and hills, and trees even growing through and into the wire in places. We followed what remained of the stream as long as we could so we could easily make our way back. After about a mile of this, the stream petered out and the landscape had completely changed. Overgrown pine passed into carefully manicured corn husks, and it almost seemed like our path disappeared. Still, with the sun rising and the sense of adventure overriding any caution we might have had, we kept going over the small hill that had appeared. A person with a broad cap and overalls, clearly a farmer of some sort, saw us as we made the crest, but we were too far away from him to easily reach and question, and we quickly moved off as he called. Another mile through the corn and the land changed again, as if with clear defined borders. I remember seeing what seemed like a gate designed by nature, consisting completely of corn stalks swaying into an arch that we passed through in our haste. Past it was a brook surrounded by thick oak trees, as picturesque as any book. We pushed forward, generally certain we were making a straight line and could get back easily. Our watches sang only an hour and a half had passed. After that peaceful respite, the terrain became a steep, rocky absent in the mile or two ahead, full of sharp brambles, twisting turns, and no clear path forward. After some debate as to whether to turn back, and no small amount of scratches and burrs in clothing, we came upon a massive valley, with the most unusual trees growing there in what seemed like an unnatural line leading deeper into the descent. The trees had long, thin branches with the bark flaked off and settled beneath as if removed, to reveal pasty white flesh underneath. The most striking feature of the trees was the leaves, which were blood red. There was no grass in the valley, though plenty of moss and a smell of dampness increasingly filled the air. We followed the trail of trees deep into the valley, time ticking away as we did so. At almost the exact bottom of the valley, surrounded by those trees and nothing else, was a 3-story Victorian-looking house. Just as we saw it, it started to rain pretty heavily, and the valley soon became pitfalls of mud and loose soil. Even from a distance away, it looked rotten and old, sagging with the weight of years, water, and decay. It was entirely of wood, the glass, where it still remained, unbroken single pane. The only non-wood on the structure being the mount for the stairs. The door was open. We were fools, we knew then, but wet fools preferred a potentially dry place, where we would definitely turn back once we got our bearings, and return to camp none the wiser. I was the leader of this expedition, and thus led my friends inside this house. I placed my foot on the first step, its hollow rot unmistakable, but still holding my weight, and continued quickly into the main foyer, urging my friends on. The entrance was about 8 feet long by 6 wide, with a long stairwell going both to the second and third floors behind us. There were clear holes that led to some darkness in some of the second flooring you could see while following the stairwell, which was lit by the large window space in the front of the house. The sound of water was loud and unmistakable, but the entry with the open door was dry. Beyond the lit area, right next to the open door, the house was dark, smelling of mold and wet, and the creaking of the wind draft our other companions. We had settled down for a minute or so while I put down my pack and pulled out my compass and was checking snacks when I heard it. A moan, not unlike the wind, rain, and draft, coming from the top of the house somewhere, if it still had a top. Then, the loudest sound of footsteps I have ever heard in my life, stamping down the stairs at the gait of an Olympic sprinter. My friends ran at the first hint of the sound. I hesitated. It was light enough to see at least 2/3 of the way up the stairs, but there was nothing there. I grabbed my bag and leaped out of the door, slamming it shut as I did so. The wet wood embedded into my fingers like it was wet paper instead of centuries-old wood. The last step caved in as I took it, sending wet splinters everywhere. I ran up the hill, chasing my friends, getting cuts and scrapes in the rain. I heard the sound of the door being kicked through my back, so loudly as I ran madly it felt like it shook the valley. I don't remember the trip back, except that we made it back by around 2 p.m. and managed to shakily get some late breakfast lunch. To this day, I have not written this story down anywhere, though I've told it a few times to others, who discount it as just adrenaline-filled imaginations. My friends heard the sound and feel differently. Still, no one looked but me. I tried to go back there a few times, but by the time I found it, the site and land was sold. I didn't explore beyond that, and have never since.
So, old cabin in the middle of the woods. Would you go in?
Yes.
No hesitation? Nothing?
I have like a knife ready on me just in case, but I want to check it out.
Because you can totally stab ghosts, Jake.
Well, you don't know. Maybe.
All right.
Maybe it's just someone in a sheet with eyes cut out.
Yeah, I fucking bet. Next story.
This story was submitted to our True Scary Stories by Reddit user Oh My Chelsea. I don't post too often on Reddit, and I'm not even sure compared to these other stories that mine will even be too creepy, but here goes. I was either 10 or 11, and we lived in this house until I was about 14 or 15. It was an extremely old house. When my parents bought it, it was 98 years old, and we were only the 4th family ever to live in it. The old couple before did seem eager to get out of there. My bedroom was the smallest room upstairs at the end of the hall. The attic door was in my bedroom, so no one could get in or out. So my father had told me that I would sleepwalk in that house. I would walk down the hall into their room and say things like, "Don't you see this book I'm reading?" and "Maisie wants to play." They were creeped out, but they chalked it up to sleepwalking. However, it was never an issue before or after this house, but it was consistent while we lived there. In my room, I was laying in bed and I heard 6 loud bangs in the attic. They were fast-paced and directly above my bed. My first time hearing it, I was so freaked out I ran out the room, but my parents convinced me it was probably a squirrel. My second time I heard it, I went right into my twin brother's room and slept in his bunk beds. I wouldn't sleep in my room anymore. One day, I had a couple girlfriends over and was telling them about these 6 bangs in the attic, and literally as I was talking about it, it happened. I remember going, "See?" because no one ever believed me. They were petrified, and one of them even went home right after. When we were moving out of the house, weird shit started happening then. Doors would slam shut. One door slammed shut so hard all the pots and pans fell down from the hooks on it. Boxes would fall over, pans would fly across the room, and our dog was constantly barking and whimpering. I always wondered why it got more intense when we were moving. I still live in my hometown, and a new family lives in that house. Anytime I'm driving by it, there's a guy who hangs out on the porch, and I always want to ask him if anything weird happens, but I don't want to freak them out.
Nothing like a good old, classic, good short ghost story.
Yeah, I do enjoy ghost stories. They're pretty...
They really get the spooky bones going. Now, it's not haunted here. I have upstairs neighbors. This is an apartment complex.
No, definitely. There's definitely ghosts there. There's one right there, in fact. Ooh, look at it. Look at it go. But anyway, for true scary stories from Reddit, like I said earlier in this video, Crimicide True Stories is going to take place every other week, with Crimicide Mainstream happening the week after Crimicide True Stories. So,
if you're subscribed, you'll get that little notification bell that tells you when it's up.
Exactly. So we hope you guys like true stories, because this is going to be a permanent thing to the channel. So we, just give it a listen. And we'll see you in the next episode.